What kind of sci-fi movies were people watching on television during the 1960s? Giant monsters were only the beginning. These forgotten films showed severed heads, alien parasites, radioactive children, and horrifying experiments that pushed audiences far beyond comfort. Some were banned, some vanished completely, and others became legendary nightmares for viewers who accidentally discovered them late at night on television. Forever. Number 12. The Creeping Terror, 1964. Imagine sitting alone in your living room late at night in 1964. The television crackles, the screen flickers. Then, suddenly, a giant alien creature that looks like a living carpet slowly crawls across the desert, swallowing screaming teenagers whole. That was The Creeping Terror. And somehow, this thing actually aired on television and terrified audiences for all the wrong reasons. The movie begins like a standard alien invasion story. A spaceship lands on Earth after a mysterious crash. Scientists and local authorities investigate the wreckage, expecting little green men or futuristic monsters. Instead, they unleash one of the strangest creatures ever put on film. The monster barely moves. It crawls at the speed of a sleepy turtle, yet every character somehow fails to escape it. Victims literally climb into its mouth, while dramatic narration tries desperately to convince viewers they are witnessing absolute horror. What made the film go way too far was not just the bizarre monster. It was the overwhelming nightmare atmosphere. Endless narration covers missing dialogue. Random scenes feel disconnected from reality. Teen dance parties suddenly turn into mass alien attacks. The movie feels less like science fiction and more like a strange transmission from another dimension. Over the years, audiences laughed at its low-budget effects, but there is something deeply unsettling about The Creeping Terror. The awkward pacing, the unnatural performances, the eerie silence between scenes. It feels cursed, like a forgotten television broadcast nobody was supposed to see again. And somehow, that made it unforgettable. Number 11. Monster A Go-Go, 1965. There are bad movies. There are unfinished movies. Then there is Monster A Go-Go, a 1965 sci-fi disaster so chaotic that viewers genuinely thought their television station had aired the wrong ending by mistake. The story starts with a terrifying premise. An astronaut returns from space after a dangerous mission. But something is horribly wrong. Radiation exposure has transformed him into a gigantic mutated creature wandering through Chicago at night. Bodies begin appearing. Panic spreads across the city. Scientists race against time to stop the monster before civilization collapses. That sounds like a normal drive-in sci-fi movie. But then everything falls apart. Scenes suddenly change without explanation. Characters appear and vanish. Entire conversations feel disconnected from the plot. The monster itself barely appears despite the title promising total destruction. The production became such a mess that different directors stitched together unfinished footage years apart, trying to create something watchable. Then comes the ending. After spending the entire movie building toward a radioactive monster apocalypse, the narrator calmly announces that the astronaut was never mutated at all. Nothing happened. There was no monster. The film simply ends as if the previous hour never existed. Audiences were stunned. What makes Monster A Go-Go legendary is how aggressively confusing it becomes. Watching it feels like drifting through a broken television signal from another universe. Late-night viewers in the 60s probably thought they were losing their minds. Yet somehow, that insanity turned this forgotten sci-fi train wreck into one of the most fascinating cult movies ever made. Number 10. The Brain That Wouldn't Die, 1962. Long before modern horror became obsessed with body mutilation and surgical nightmares, there was The Brain That Wouldn't Die, a 1962 sci-fi shocker so disturbing that audiences could barely believe it was shown on television. The film opens with a horrifying accident. A brilliant surgeon crashes his car while driving with his fiancée Jan. He survives. She does not. At least not completely. In one of the most disturbing scenes of the decade, the doctor secretly carries her severed head back to his laboratory and keeps it alive inside a metal tray filled with chemicals. That alone sounds insane. But the movie keeps getting darker. Locked inside the lab, Jan watches helplessly as her fiancé hunts for the perfect woman whose body he can steal and attach to her living head. Meanwhile, hidden behind a locked closet door is another nightmare entirely. A failed experiment so monstrous the doctor keeps it chained in darkness like some radioactive animal. What made the movie feel dangerous was how serious it played everything. There is no comedy, no campy relief. The film treats its horrifying premise with total sincerity. Jan screams in terror while trapped as nothing more than a conscious head. The doctor descends deeper into madness with every scene. Television audiences in the early 60s had never seen anything quite like it. Even decades later, certain images remain unforgettable. The cold laboratory lighting, the unnatural silence, the terrible feeling that science has crossed a line it cannot return from. This was not harmless monster fun anymore. This was pure nightmare fuel. Number 9. Night of the Bloody Apes, 1969. By the end of the 1960s, sci-fi horror movies were becoming more violent, more bizarre, and far more dangerous. Then, Night of the Bloody Apes arrived and completely shattered whatever limits still existed. This Mexican cult nightmare begins with a desperate father trying to save his dying son through radical medical experiments. Instead of using normal science, the doctor performs a grotesque heart transplant using organs from a savage ape-like creature. The result becomes an unstoppable monster with superhuman strength and animal rage. And that is only the beginning. The film quickly transforms into absolute madness, filled with brutal murders, bloody wrestling matches, screaming victims, and surgical scenes that pushed television standards far beyond comfort. Unlike many older sci-fi films that relied on suggestion, this movie shows disturbing violence directly on screen. Bodies are slashed apart, victims are mauled. The monster rampages through the city like a creature escaped from a forbidden laboratory. What shocked audiences most was the strange collision of genres. One moment it feels like classic mad scientist science fiction. The next, it becomes a savage exploitation horror film drenched in blood and chaos. It was raw, aggressive, and deeply uncomfortable for its era. Many viewers first discovered the film through heavily edited television broadcasts late at night. Even censored versions felt extreme. The grainy visuals and wild performances made everything seem even more dangerous, as if the movie itself had been banned somewhere and secretly leaked onto TV. Today, Night of the Bloody Apes survives as one of the most outrageous sci-fi horror hybrids of the decade. A movie so wild it still feels illegal. Number 8. X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, 1963. Most 60s sci-fi movies warned audiences about aliens, radioactive monsters, or giant insects. But X, The Man with the X-Ray Eyes, did something far more terrifying. It warned viewers about knowledge itself. The film stars a brilliant scientist obsessed with expanding human vision beyond natural limits. He believes the human eye is weak and limited. Through dangerous experiments, he develops special eye drops that allow him to see through solid objects. At first, the discovery feels miraculous. He can diagnose diseases instantly. He can see through walls. He becomes more powerful than any ordinary human alive. Then the nightmare begins. The scientist soon realizes his vision keeps evolving uncontrollably. He no longer sees just bones or organs. He begins witnessing hidden layers of reality that no human mind was meant to process. Faces distort into grotesque shapes. Normal spaces become terrifying landscapes of invisible energy. Eventually, he looks beyond the physical universe itself and witnesses something cosmic, horrifying, and impossible to explain. What made the movie so shocking was its growing sense of psychological terror. Unlike traditional monster movies, the danger comes entirely from human curiosity. The more the scientist sees, the more reality collapses around him. His sanity disintegrates scene by scene. Then comes the ending. Roger Corman transformed a simple sci-fi concept into existential horror. And once audiences saw that final scene, they never forgot it. At number 7, at Matango, 1963. At first glance, Matango looks like another harmless Japanese monster movie from the 1960s. A group of wealthy strangers become stranded on a remote island after a violent storm. They search for food. They search for rescue. Everything feels like a typical survival adventure. Then they discover the mushrooms. Huge, strange mushrooms growing across the island begin appearing everywhere. The survivors are warned not to eat them, but hunger, paranoia, and fear slowly destroy the group from within. One by one, they give in, and once they do, their bodies begin changing into grotesque fungal creatures. What makes Matango unforgettable is how strangely realistic the horror feels. There are no giant city-smashing monsters, no heroic scientists saving humanity. Instead, the film becomes a psychological collapse where isolation transforms ordinary people into selfish, desperate monsters long before the mutations even begin. The mushroom transformations themselves were deeply disturbing for television audiences at the time. Faces become swollen and deformed. Human skin turns moldy and unnatural. Victims stumble through the shadows, barely recognizable anymore. The creature designs looked genuinely sickly, which made the movie far more unsettling than flashy monster films of the era. But beneath the horror was something darker. That deeper meaning gave Matango an eerie intelligence rare for 60s sci-fi horror. It was not just about monsters, it was about humanity rotting from the inside out. Number 6. The Flesh Eaters, 1964. In the 1960s, audiences expected science fiction movies to feature giant monsters, robots, or alien invasions. What they did not expect was a film about microscopic creatures that could dissolve human flesh in seconds. That was the terrifying concept behind The Flesh Eaters, and it pushed television horror into deeply uncomfortable territory. The story follows a small group of travelers stranded on an isolated island after their airplane crashes near the coast. At first, the island seems empty and harmless. Then strange deaths begin happening in the surrounding water. Victims enter the ocean only to emerge screaming as their skin and muscle are violently consumed by invisible organisms hidden beneath the surface. The idea alone was horrifying because the enemy could not easily be seen. Unlike giant movie monsters, these creatures attacked silently. The water itself became deadly. Every wave felt dangerous. Every step near the shoreline carried fear. What truly shocked viewers was the film's surprisingly graphic violence for 1964. Bodies are stripped apart. Skeletons emerge from bloody remains. Panic spreads through the island as survivors realize escape may be impossible. The movie combined biological horror with Cold War paranoia, creating the feeling that science had unleashed something unstoppable upon humanity. For television audiences expecting harmless sci-fi adventure, this movie felt vicious, brutal, and far ahead of its time. Number 5. Seconds, 1966. Most people expected science fiction in the 1960s to be fun escapism filled with rockets and futuristic gadgets. Then Seconds arrived and delivered something far more terrifying: the destruction of human identity itself. The film follows a miserable middle-aged banker trapped in a lifeless existence. One day, he receives a mysterious offer from a secret organization capable of giving people entirely new lives. Through advanced surgery, the company can fake deaths, alter appearances, and transform clients into younger, more attractive versions of themselves. The banker agrees, hoping to escape his empty life forever. At first, the transformation feels miraculous. He awakens with a new face, a new body, and a new identity played by Rock Hudson. He moves into a luxurious world filled with freedom, pleasure, and endless opportunity. But slowly, he realizes the horrifying truth hiding beneath the fantasy. Nothing feels real. Every relationship seems artificial. Every conversation feels rehearsed. The organization controls everything around him, including his future. The more he struggles to reclaim his humanity, the more trapped he becomes inside the system that created him. Then comes the ending, cold, merciless, and unforgettable. For many television viewers, the film felt less like entertainment and more like an existential nightmare about losing your soul in modern society. Decades later, Second still feels frighteningly ahead of its time. Number 4. Gok, Body Snatcher from Hell, 1968. There was ever a 1960s sci-fi movie that truly felt like a hallucination broadcast onto late-night television. It was Gok, Body Snatcher from Hell. This Japanese horror nightmare did not just go too far. It sprinted past every limit audiences thought science fiction had. The story begins aboard a passenger airplane flying through violent weather. Political assassins, criminals, businessmen, and ordinary civilians are trapped together as tension rises inside the cabin. Then, something impossible appears in the sky. A glowing alien object collides with the aircraft, forcing it to crash into a barren wasteland far from civilization. That is when the real horror starts. An alien parasite capable of possessing human bodies begins hunting the survivors one by one. The creature enters through grotesque openings that split open across victims' foreheads, revealing pulsing, bloody flesh underneath. Once infected, the humans transform into pale, emotionless killers, driven by alien hunger. For 1968, this imagery was absolutely shocking. The film mixed body horror, apocalyptic dread, and psychedelic visuals into something that felt completely unhinged. Bright red skies flood the screen while survivors descend into paranoia, madness, and violence. Humanity collapses faster than the alien attack itself. Television viewers expecting simple monster entertainment instead witnessed one of the darkest sci-fi films of the decade. And once those forehead scenes appeared, audiences never forgot them. Number 3. Village of the Damned, 1960. There is something deeply terrifying about children who never smile. That fear became unforgettable in Village of the Damned, a 1960 sci-fi horror masterpiece that quietly traumatized an entire generation of television viewers. Unlike giant monsters or invading aliens, this movie presented horror in the most innocent form imaginable. Perfectly calm, emotionless children with supernatural powers. The story begins after an entire English village mysteriously loses consciousness for several hours. Nobody understands what happened. Then, months later, every woman who could become pregnant suddenly gives birth at the exact same time. The children appear human, but something is horribly wrong. They all look identical, they all think together, and they possess terrifying mental abilities capable of controlling human minds. As the children grow older, strange deaths begin occurring throughout the village. Adults who threaten them are driven to suicide accidents or violent destruction through psychic manipulation. The glowing eyes of the children became one of the most iconic nightmare images in sci-fi history. The film also tapped directly into Cold War fears spreading across the 1960s. Many audiences saw the children as symbols of invasion, mutation, or the terrifying loss of human identity during the nuclear age. Even decades later, Village of the Damned remains disturbing because its horror feels believable. Not loud, not chaotic, just cold, silent, and unstoppable. Number 2. The Damned, 1963. At first, The Damned does not even feel like science fiction. It begins like a rebellious crime drama filled with violent bikers, angry youth, and uneasy romance along the English coastline. But slowly, the movie transforms into something far darker and far more disturbing than audiences ever expected. An American tourist becomes involved with a dangerous gang led by a cruel, unpredictable young man who terrorizes everyone around him. While trying to escape the chaos, the characters stumble onto a horrifying government secret hidden deep underground near the cliffs.
Inside a heavily guarded bunker, they discover a group of children living in total isolation. The children appear calm, intelligent, and strangely emotionless. Then the truth is revealed. They are radioactive survivors created as part of a secret experiment designed to preserve humanity after nuclear war. Their bodies emit deadly radiation, meaning they can never safely exist among ordinary people. That revelation completely changes the film. Suddenly, the story becomes a chilling nightmare about governments preparing for apocalypse while sacrificing innocents in the process. The underground shelter feels cold, lifeless, and hopeless, like a prison disguised as scientific progress. The children themselves are tragic figures raised without freedom, love, or any understanding of normal human life. Only isolation, fear, and the terrifying possibility that civilization might willingly destroy its own children in the name of survival. For television audiences expecting simple entertainment, this film hit like emotional devastation. Number 1. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. Before Alien terrified audiences in the 70s, there was Planet of the Vampires, a 1965 sci-fi horror masterpiece so visually disturbing and unbelievably ahead of its time that many viewers could not believe it was made during the same decade as colorful, family-friendly space adventures. The film begins with two spaceships receiving a mysterious distress signal from an unknown planet. As the crews descend onto the fog-covered world, strange things immediately start happening. Crew members suddenly turn violent, attacking each other without explanation, as if some invisible force is entering their minds. Then the dead begin rising. The astronauts discover that ancient alien entities living beneath the planet's surface can possess human corpses, using them like living shells. Bodies reanimate with empty expressions, wandering through glowing mist, while the survivors slowly realize escape may be impossible. What made the movie feel terrifyingly advanced was director Mario Bava's hypnotic visual style. The alien planet looks like a nightmare dimension filled with red skies, black shadows, skeleton remains, and endless poisonous fog. Every scene feels dreamlike and unnatural, as though reality itself is decaying. One sequence especially shocked audiences. The astronauts discover enormous alien skeletons, proving that gigantic ancient creatures once ruled the planet. Years later, science fiction fans noticed how heavily this moment resembled ideas later used in Alien. For 1965, this was not ordinary sci-fi. This was pure existential horror floating through deep space. These movies were strange, disturbing, and completely unforgettable. They proved that 1960s science fiction could be darker, weirder, and more dangerous than anyone expected. If you enjoyed this trip into forgotten nightmare cinema, subscribe for more lost cult classics, banned films, and shocking retro sci-fi discoveries Hollywood wants audiences to forget forever.